All right. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Kent. I am the Senate DFL leader here in the Minnesota Senate, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. It is a pretty lovely winter day here in Minnesota, and I really see that as a promising start to the 2021 legislative session. Opening day for a new legislature is always filled with promise, and with the opportunity to welcome a group of new senators, that promise is even brighter. I am beyond pleased to introduce the newly elected members of the Senate DFL. These 7 individuals from across our state represent a truly historic class, and their strong voices will be valuable additions to our caucus as we do our important work for the people of Minnesota. It is my privilege to introduce them to you now briefly, and you'll have a chance to hear from them in a very few minutes. In alphabetical order, I'll present Senator Omar Fateh, who represents Minneapolis, Senator Johnson Stewart of Wayzata, Senator Mary Kanesh from New Brighton, Senator Jennifer McEwen from Duluth, Senator Erin Murphy right here in St. Paul, Senator Lindsey representing Burnsville, and Senator Eric Putnam from St. Cloud. I will point out that Senator Fateh is the first Somali American elected to the Minnesota Senate, and Senator Kanesh is the first Indigenous member of the Minnesota Senate as well. So this truly is a historic class. We should also note that there are now 6 members of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus in the Senate DFL, and our caucus is now 40% women. So it's really worth acknowledging that we continue to better reflect the people of Minnesota as we do their work. These talented and dedicated individuals bring a truly diverse collection of experiences and perspectives. As has been true of the Senate DFL caucus, we have members from urban, suburban, and greater Minnesota communities. We come from a range of personal and professional backgrounds and experiences, and we represent communities that reflect the rich and diverse heritage that is Minnesota. We value these differences, knowing that such diversity also brings strength through a range of views. And by welcoming all our strong voices at the table, through respecting and listening to each other, we are able to come together around the values that we share with our communities across this great state. We believe every Minnesota child deserves a great education, that we all need clean air and clean water, access to quality, affordable health care, jobs that sustain our families, secure housing, and safe communities for all Minnesotans. It is through these values that the Minnesota Senate DFL will lead boldly and fight for solutions for a better future for Minnesotans, no exceptions. 2020 has demonstrated that it really matters to have a government that truly cares for us. Together, using facts and science, we can ensure that we all have what we need, not just to survive, but to thrive, to make sure families have access to the tools they need to get through this pandemic and come out even stronger. As you will see, this is a group of determined and hopeful senators who will be real assets in this important work. Each of them is focused on the support, relief, and recovery for Minnesotans' health, economy, and communities. Each will share a few thoughts about those 3 focus areas, beginning with Senator Erin Murphy. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Leader Kent, and it is good to be here today with everybody immediately following our swearing in. And I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the moment that we're in with regard to COVID and the pandemic. And like my colleagues have spent the greater part of the last year campaigning and talking with Minnesotans through the course of this pandemic. And I want to start by sharing that I recall the very first time that someone shared with me, it was a fellow nurse, that they had cared for their father at the end of their life, and that he passed from COVID and he did it alone. And I remember thinking about the inhumanity of that, the wrongness of that, of being alone. And that is something that we have grown accustomed to, or maybe be immune to in the course of this pandemic. We are experiencing untold losses of life and livelihood, and we haven't really been able to begin the process of grieving or acknowledging what we've really lost, and we won't until we extinguish the virus. We're heading into, and we saw it today, an unforgivable political fight about the virus, a fight that undercuts the power we have together to stop the spread, a fight that prolongs the harm. And we are steadfast in our commitment to end the crisis and to invest in our people and our communities to build a bright future for all of us. We are determined together to build a healthcare system that cares for all of us, regardless of our region or our race, our wealth or employment, our age or our gender. And as COVID burns through our communities, the relationship between health and a safe home, strong schools for our children, our work, and our environment, that connection is undeniable. As we heal after this crisis, we are committed to revenue and to investment in our people and our communities to repair the damage that we've experienced and to build a strong and a healthy future for everybody in Minnesota. And with that, I'll turn it to Senator Jen McEwen.
Thank you, Senator Murphy, and thank you, Senator Kent as well. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're really I know all of us are really delighted to be here talking with you. So yes, I am really excited to begin this work representing the Senate District 7, which is the beautiful city of Duluth, at the zenith of the Great Lakes in the center of our continent. One of the reasons why I decided to run is because of this sense of urgency that I and my constituents were feeling and voicing and wanting to see from elected officials in regard to a myriad of issues, core issues, but really central amongst them is the climate crisis. We are not only right now living through this pandemic and working our way through it, but we have begun now to experience the climate crisis. It is upon us, it is here. And climate scientists the world over are clamoring. They're clamoring for our civil institutions, our governments, our economic systems to act now. They've told us that we have about 10 years to turn this ship. And that is a little bit intimidating, but it's also a tremendous opportunity for us. We are in a position now, we are going to build back our economy after this. We are going to build back in many ways as we move through this pandemic. But as we do that now, we have this amazing opportunity to build back a clean energy-based economy. And core to that economy is going to be living wage, thriving wage jobs, good union jobs for Minnesotans. Jobs where people can support families, jobs where people will be able to contribute to their communities, and communities both in the metro and in the suburban areas and in our rural areas in Minnesota will be able to thrive. This is just an opportunity that I'm really excited to get to work on with all of my colleagues, and excited to explore and get moving immediately on this project. And so as we move forward into this new era, which is what it truly is, we're moving into a new area of change. I think all of us are really feeling a sense of that, and a sense of tapping into this new politics of care, a politics of caring for one another, and what that's going to mean. So central to that will be building back a clean energy economy that is going to put us in a better place than we were before the pandemic, and that is going to set us up for a bright future. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to my colleague, Senator Omar Fateh.
Thank you, Senator Jen. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you and swearing in with an incredible, awesome freshman class that's really hungry to fight for that change that we're seeking. I'm really energized, and it's really energizing to see the possibilities that we can create together. So thank you so much. My name is Omar Fateh, and I'm the state senator for District 62, which is in South Minneapolis. And our district has been hit hard this year by the COVID-19 crisis, as well as the unrest following the murder of George Floyd. It is our task to rebuild, and that means guaranteeing high-paying jobs to the workforce of South Minneapolis, but also statewide. It is not enough just to offer folks the bare minimum. We need long-term, living wage jobs to revitalize our communities. Throughout my work at the Senate, my goal will be to ensure that every Minnesotan has their basic needs met, that they can find dignified, gainful employment for a livable wage with benefits, so that they can support their families and work towards a secure retirement. Our residents here in District 62, like many Minnesotans, have been struggling since before the COVID-19 crisis, and we just cannot afford to return to the status quo. Our district, our constituents have too much debt. They cannot afford housing, and they live at risk of medical bankruptcy. The COVID crisis has tested us all, but it also presented us new opportunities to create a better future. And my promise today is that I will keep fighting until every single resident in Minnesota has their basic needs met. I'm proud to be representing South Minneapolis in this long fight, and I look forward to coming in with this freshman class to fight for a more equitable society. So thank you all. And with that, I will pass it to Senator Ann.
Thanks, Senator Fateh. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. My name is Johnson Stewart, and I'm newly elected to serve the cities of Woodland, Plymouth, and Minnetonka. As a group, we certainly understand that thousands of businesses are struggling right now with the as a result of the pandemic, and we are looking forward to helping them. So I too am excited to get started. I am a business owner myself. I employ about 30 people, and I personally have experienced many of those same struggles, including sick employees, quarantined employees, loss of work, frankly. We've had cash flow issues, and so I really understand, as do many of my colleagues here, what business owners are going through. We come as a group ready to help both those employers, but also the employees. So we share that value of finding work for people, either by creating new opportunities or putting people back to work. And we're all committed to doing that, not just here in the metro area, but in all 87 counties that we serve as senators. The COVID did teach us one thing. It taught us that for many people, remote work is both possible and preferred. And I think, as Jen said, we should look at this as an opportunity. It's really a new era as we think about work and where people can work. I bring a long history of job training and workforce training in the construction industry. I am very excited to work with my colleagues to find opportunities to reinforce the infrastructure that allows people to work wherever they want and still have fulfilling jobs and careers. I think we've also seen the lack of infrastructure for remote learning for students and how that's impacted many of our teachers and students, and I look forward to working on that. So as a member of the bonding committee and as transportation committee with Jen, I think we're really excited to look for ways that we can use infrastructure as ways to find new jobs for people and to continue to create opportunities. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Senator Port.
Thank you, Senator Johnson Stewart. Hi, everyone. I am Senator Lindsey Port, the newly elected senator representing District 56, which is Burnsville, Savage, and the northwest part of Lakeville. As we all bring different pasts and experience and expertise to the Senate. And for me, small businesses really are the backbone of both our economy and also our families. Through this pandemic and before, Minnesotans have struggled to balance economic needs and the needs that face our families. This last year has really highlighted that heavy burden on small businesses to provide benefits like health insurance and paid family medical leave that help them compete with large corporations while still remaining financially stable. My husband and I have both run small organizations, and the cost of providing these benefits is often prohibitive. Yet now more than ever, it is really clear that Minnesotans need access to affordable health insurance and to be able to take time off from work to care for their families. Especially during this pandemic, it's become such a necessity. But small businesses cannot shoulder those costs alone. it is past time for a path to a Minnesota Care buy-in for all who want to, especially small businesses, to be able to provide that for their employees. And also a statewide paid family medical leave program. Over the next several months, especially as rent and eviction moratoriums come to a close, we'll also be facing an unprecedented housing crisis in our state. We remain committed as a group to investing in safe, affordable housing that fits the needs of our families all across the state. Minnesotans have cared for each other in extraordinary ways this year, and it's our job now to work to help center safe and healthy communities in all of our priorities. And I'll pass it now to Senator Eric Putnam.
Thank you, Senator Ford. I am Senator Eric Putnam. I'm going to represent District 14, which is St. Cloud, Wade Park, Haven-Minden Township, and St. Augusta in central Minnesota. And first, I'm incredibly grateful to be here with my new colleagues, partially because they're also dear friends. You know, to echo what Leader Kent mentioned in her opening remarks, we're all from different bits of Minnesota, and we don't agree on every policy, and we're not going to. But our deep relationship is proof that we can be strengthened by differences rather than divided by them, when we're united in the purpose of working for working Minnesotans. And never has coming together been more important. In this legislative session, we need to be focused on not just supporting a community we assume, but building the one that we deserve. Our public institutions play a central role in this work. My grandfather was a police officer at an SRO, and he would agree that we need criminal justice reform that helps put the public in public safety. Our institutions of higher education are central to this work of community building as well. As a professor and as a member of the Higher Education Committee, I will work on initiatives that make post-secondary education accessible to people of every background, in every community. Higher ed can be an active force in building lives, building our economy, but also building our community. So now to talk a little bit more about education, perhaps, and her priorities, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Senator Mary Kanesh.
Well, greetings, everybody. It's good to see the faces that are on here that I've known before. I'm Senator Kanesh, a 4-year veteran in the House, and now I've just scooted over to the, the Senate to serve my entire district, and I'm forever proud to be able to do that. I represent the communities of St. Anthony Village and New Brighton, Columbia Heights, Hilltop, a little bit of Spring Lake Park, and Fridley now. And it is my honor to join these other 6, as well as the full Senate on both sides of the aisle, to really make sure that Minnesota families are receiving the resources and the items that they need to succeed. As an educator myself for over 25 years, I have seen the ebb and flows, the progress we make when we invest in education in a really intentional, hearty way. And I've seen what it's like when we haven't done that. With this new COVID situation, it has turned our educational system, our families upside down and inside out. Just this fall, I completed my last quarter of school. I retired in November, and imagine what it was like for me as a library media specialist to ensure that every student in my school, over 900 students, had a device in their hands that was working, access to the internet, because we know that knowledge is power, and then also the ability to access the platforms that they needed to work with their teachers. And there was not a day that went by where I didn't have more than 2 handfuls of students or parents or teachers or grandparents that were on the phone with me crying because it was just too hard. And it really, really, really is hard. I think we all recognize that, whether we have children at home that are distance learning, whether we're teachers trying to get that information and that education to our students, or whether it's the administration that just isn't sure. Should we open? Shouldn't we? How are we going to make sure that our teachers are safe in the building as well as our students? And so as we slowly reopen the schools to in-person learning, we have an incredible opportunity to look at different ways to rebuild our educational system. not just in person, but the distance learning part of it, and making sure that we are putting the resources there. And when I say resources, that's going to cost money. It's going to cost a lot of money to rebuild and make it even better. We don't need to go back to the way it was, but let's make sure that we are rebuilding it so that every single student across Minnesota, whether it's preschool or pre-K all the way through elementary, middle school, high school, higher education, have access to either free or affordable education, because our economy, our future really depends on that. As Senator Kent mentioned, I am the first Indigenous descendant a woman to be in the Senate, of which I am extremely, extremely proud. I would like to remind everyone that we are currently on the land of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people. And one thing that I have seen over the 4 years as a House member is a broadening understanding of the struggles of our American Indian tribes here in Minnesota. And those are some of the things that I would like to continue working on. I feel like as an educator, I've done a lot of educating around what it's like to be an indigenous person here in Minnesota. And I would ask that our senators and our House members once again wrap their arms around our Native folks and make sure that they also have the resources, because our Indian tribes, our Indian communities are some of the folks that have really had the hardest impact of this COVID-19, and they're going to need some help recovering from it as well. And so thank you very much. I look forward to serving the people of Minnesota. Oh, and I would like to pass this back now to our leader, Leader Kent.
Thank you, Senator Kanesh. It's really fun not to have that mouthful of Senator-elect when I refer to you guys. Yeah, and I'm sorry I was a little late on the mute button there. Thank you for covering for me. So now we would really just like to thank our members for introducing themselves and giving you an indication of what they're focusing on and who they are, so that you can begin to get to know them, and would just like to open up the floor. I know Mary LaHammer said she had a question in chat. Mary, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Yeah, Senator Kent, I want to follow up. Senator Putnam or we're calling her Kanesh now, aren't we? Are you not hyphenated anymore officially? Can you answer that?
I downsized. I'm just Kanesh. I'm going to make it easy for everyone.
All right, sorry. I still have the old habit from
I know it slips off my tongue all the time too.
I know. I won't make a joke about you being house trained, I promise. I think I just did. I want to follow up with you and Senator Pate about the increased diversity. The Senate has kind of been the land of the old white man for a very long time, and this election is important. You just talked about the historic importance. So I'd love you and Senator Pate to talk about the increased diversity and why that matters in representing the communities across Minnesota.
Sure. I am a firm believer that stories can help make a difference. And I think that made a difference in the House when I shared the pandemic of our missing and murdered Indigenous women, and how we had the 100% support on both sides of the aisle for that task force. Some of the jurisdictional issues that our tribes have struggled with, other health issues and education issues. These are things that my House members and many of the senators had no idea were some of the struggles that our Native American communities have dealt with. And oftentimes we've been told, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but if you don't even have those bootstraps to pull yourself up with, and nobody knows that, the expectation can be very different. When we tell those stories, when we give the facts, when we share the struggles, people start to listen, and maybe not right away, but certainly they start to listen. And when we look around Minnesota, we have 11 tribes here in Minnesota. We have a large diversity of people of color. And things have changed in the House because of this diversity, and we're hoping to bring those kind of really good changes to Minnesota in the Senate as well. And maybe Senator Fateh, what would you like to add?
Yes, I'm honored to be coming in serving as the first Somali American coming in the Senate, especially with my sister Mary coming in as the first Indigenous woman. It is truly an honor. And this is something that we want to see and we want to continue. We want to see more folks stepping up, not just organizing within their communities, but stepping up and running to represent their communities. For example, when you look at every issue, communities of color are the ones that are being largely neglected. Minnesota is one of the worst states in terms of servicing our communities of color in education. We see police brutality persist and Black and brown bodies being murdered. And we need voices that come from these communities that understand the struggle and that are suffering to come in and represent those voices so that I think people will listen. And that's why I was elected. That's why I was brought here. And I believe that's why Mary was brought here also. So we're going to keep up the fight and we're going to do everything we can to fight for that working class message that encompasses all communities, right? Whether it's the Latinx community, the East African community, the Indigenous community, we all struggle with food insecurity. We all struggle with our public education being underfunded. We all struggle with seeing our wages stagnate while rent's increasing, right? The working class message speaks to all of us, and that's something that I want to make sure that I carry on with me in this fight.
Thank you.
Another question? Either in chat or speak up. You're not usually shy. Well, that's easy.
This is Ricardo from the Minnesota Reformer. Sorry, I was slow on my unmute button there.
That's my job, Ricardo. Good to hear from you.
So my question is, given, I think someone had touched on this in terms of the diversity, but I think, just more generally, I think what this new class of incoming senators represents is a far more progressive caucus than the Senate has typically seen. So I'm curious to hear, from some of the members who maybe have some thoughts on this, how you would go ahead, pushing for some of these more progressive types of ideas in a Senate that is, likes to pride itself on its deliberate considerations of issues and typically is much slower than the House to move ahead on wide-ranging and transformational change.
Anybody want to volunteer? How about Senator Port?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that one. That's a great question, Ricardo. Thank you. I think one of the things that we all worked really hard on our campaigns and built relationships in our districts all across the state from really diverse districts. And we are a progressive class because we ran with our communities and our communities gave us their voices, gave us their stories, and we ran with them in every single one of our cases. And I think that we've really seen all across the state of Minnesota that the status quo is not working. It wasn't working before the pandemic, and it's not going to work after. And we have a responsibility to make sure that as we're building back from this pandemic, that we are building back better, we're building back new. And I think it's important that we have new, more diverse voices at the table, but it's also really important that we bring our communities with us. And I think that that is going to help guide us, and it's going to help bring those conversations to the Senate that maybe haven't been had in the past. And we're happy to make some space for those and to be, a group of folks who came here to get to work. To be honest, I think all 7 of us would say we didn't come here, we didn't get elected, we didn't work for this to wait around. We came to work for the people of Minnesota, and that is going to be our guiding light through this. And I think we have behind us all of our communities. And so that is going to continue to push us to make sure that we are having the conversations about what Minnesotans need in regards to the pandemic, in regards to vaccine distribution, in regards to businesses building back after this, but also in what does our future economy look like? What does our future education system look like? We have an opportunity to really take a look at what we want for Minnesota. And I think we are a varied and dynamic group that's going to come in and do just that.
Anybody else want to address that question?
I would just like to add one thing. Thank you, Susan. And I think we are coming into office at a historic and perilous moment in Minnesota and in this country, in part because of the pandemic and in part because of the attacks that we're seeing on our democracy. And I feel very duty bound, as do my colleagues, that we come to office and come to this work to do the work of the people. And we have spent, the last year talking, listening with, and really experiencing life through this pandemic. And in honor of that experience and understanding the lives and the ways in which people are experiencing this pandemic, we have to do the work of the people. And so we shouldn't measure on a yardstick of left to right. Instead, we should measure our progress in attacking the problems that Minnesotans are experiencing and bringing to bear solutions that will solve those problems for them. I'm committed to that, and I'm certain my colleagues are as well.
Thank you. We have a question from Shannon.
Hi, everybody. So my question is just for a couple of people who'd like to jump in on it, but this is a budget year. And as of now, there's a $1 billion-ish shortfall. We'll find out more numbers later, but chances are there's not going to be a lot of money to do new things with. So how are you thinking about that problem right now?
Senator Murphy, why don't you start with that one?
Thanks, Senator Kent. And thanks for the question, Shannon. Back to my earlier point, our job here is to work for the people of Minnesota. And they sent us here to make sure that our kids are getting a great education, that we have healthcare we can count on, that we have a safe place to live. And so when we think about the budget and the work in front of us, we should be using this process to make sure that we are advancing those goals. And part of that is about balancing that budget. What I learned in 2013 and 14, when we finally, after a number of years, balanced the budget, is that it took revenue. And it took the courage, I think, of a legislature to recognize that we were not going to balance the budget by making cuts over and over again. And when we did that in the years prior to 13 and 14, we continued to experience deficits as a result of that effort to balance the budget and during the Great Recession. Minnesotans are experiencing this pandemic in horrific ways. And if we want our kids to catch up, we're going to have to invest in our schools. We can't simply go back to school and say, everything's going to be fine now, because our kids have lost something. And we're going to have to invest in the summer school and additional efforts to make sure that they are able to catch up. So I think we have to set our goals based on what Minnesotans need from us and build our budget around that.
And I would just add to that and say, one of the things that we really saw in the revised forecast is that this pandemic has not hit people equally. It is our frontline workers. It is our essential workers who are bearing the brunt of this. We know that unemployment is much higher among communities of colors. We know that unemployment is higher for women of color more than white women, but women. There are real disparities that are coming out of the pandemic, never mind what we had going in. And we know that there are a lot of people who've done quite well through this pandemic. A number of companies have profited handsomely. And it just, I think, goes to a basic sense of fairness that I think Minnesotans really understand, that in a time that is as painful and hard as this is on our kids, on our businesses, on our families, that, for some folks to be profiting while others are really struggling is just fundamentally unfair. And we shouldn't, whatever we end up doing, and there's a lot that's going to become available as we understand the federal fund situation, as we understand the forecast that we'll get before the final budget gets done. A lot of moving pieces still to sort through. But it's just so clear that when we have to make these decisions, for example, if we don't at least keep up with inflation, never mind the added costs for our schools that have come about because of the pandemic. That forces cuts at our school districts. I know my school districts have big budget cuts on their agenda in coming weeks. And then all of those costs, either get pushed onto property taxes of local homeowners and renters, or it comes back to them in terms of fees and cuts to really important services that will affect students disproportionately. So it's, you can't pretend that that there's not just a real issue of values here and how we make sure that we're taking care of those who need us most as we move forward.
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to add just a few things. So I'm a civil engineer and I have an expertise in road construction. And one of the reasons that I decided to run is my frustration with our lack of willingness as a culture, really, to invest in our roads and our bridges, but also in our sewer pipes, frankly, and our water systems. The last bonding bill luckily was passed last fall, and it did have quite a bit of money dedicated to local water drinking systems, and I think that's really important. I want to, I think it's time we have to invest in pipes. Frankly, I have been in those pipes. They are corroding. And if we don't start fixing our infrastructure, we can't, engineers like to say, we can't kick that can down the road. We really can't. So whether we're successful or not, I think this is a time to talk about revenue increase towards supporting our infrastructure. Many of us are able to own our own homes. We know that maintenance is required. We know that if our water heater breaks, we can't, tape it up with Band-Aids and candle wax. We've got to replace the water heater or we're going to have more problems. So that's an area where I think we have an opportunity. I'm not naive. I know it's a hard sell, but I think having an engineer in the legislature telling people the real truth about what the inside of a sewer pipe looks like before it's lined, I mean, that is real experience. So I'm excited to share my knowledge, but I'm not naive in thinking that it's going to be easy. But I think we have to talk about revenue increases, whether it's a gas tax or whatever, but I'm there for it.
And all that work is jobs for Minnesotans, and that's a very important part of the equation.
Absolutely. It's a triple win. It's jobs, not only for workers, but every worker brings money home and they spend money. And then every construction job, whether it's vertical or horizontal, a building or a road, brings money into the local economy. They have to buy gasoline, they have to buy new tires, they have to buy product. It's a well-proven financial boost into a local economy. So that's one thing I hope to do with Jen on transportation and on capital investment.
Next, we have a question from Bill Werner.
Yeah, Madam Leader, and I think thank you for taking the question. And I think Senator Johnson Stewart, I do prefer Senator Stewart or Senator Johnson Stewart, just so that we know at the beginning, Senator.
Well, it's Johnson Stewart. So
okay, that's the way you prefer it, and that's the way I will from this point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
You brought up the issue of bonding, and Senator Bach has made a bonding proposal. And the question here is, what do the Democrats in the Minnesota Senate think needs to be done about bonding, and what about if it's linked to the governor's emergency powers? Now, Representative Dowd, Leader Dowd, Minority Leader Dowd in the House was somewhat non-committal on that, on whether that would happen or not happen. It happened last year. It could happen again this year. What is going to be Democrats' stance on this in terms of how they might approach the governor on possibly easing off some of his emergency powers? This, I think, is more a question for Leader Kent. Forgive me.
No, glad to. Well, I would just say that when Leader Dowd tried to link the bonding bill to the emergency powers, I don't think that worked out particularly well for them. I think Minnesotans really recognized that those were two very important issues that needed to be considered on their own merits, and the legislature needs to do its job in both ways. We need to have a proper process to assess bonding projects and make sure we put together a bill that's not just centered on a number, but making sure that these are shovel-ready projects that we can get going pretty quickly and start making a difference in terms of putting people to work and getting those assets done in our communities as soon as possible. And as I said last year, I will say again this year, especially in a pandemic, it is one of the few economic stimulus tools that we have available to us in the Minnesota legislature. And so we should do as much as we can and get that work done and put those people to work and make a difference in our communities. And then when it comes to the emergency powers, I have said 7 special sessions now, you know, if Republicans really want to be involved, they tend to like to talk about how nobody invites them to the party. Well, last I checked, they have gavels. They can convene hearings on any issue. They can pass any bill they want to. They should do it in a way that is accountable to the public and have hearings and debate and get stakeholder input. If they want it to get passed through the House and get signed by the governor, there are probably some strategies they ought to adopt there. But so far, there's not been a lot of interest in actually doing anything. They just like to talk about it. So I continue to think there's plenty of role for the legislature to more assert ourselves into some of these issues. I think it was that's an old habit. Senator Murphy was talking about eviction moratoriums. Those are things that we can codify. There are things we can do. Minnesota is one of the only states that doesn't have on the books a price gouging statute. As someone who grew up in a hurricane state, I was really astonished to learn that. And, that's something that we should consider codifying as well. Because that we could never get that done. That's something that's in the executive order. So there are things we can and should be doing. But, that is up to the legislature to do the jobs. And if the Senate Republicans think they have a better idea, they can start putting those forward and let's take it through the process.
Madam Leader, what do you think would be a good number for a bonding bill? This session?
You're the first person to ask me that question, and I have not actually not thought about it. So okay. I'll just quote my friend Speaker Hortman and just say the bigger the better.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anybody want to add to that, or do we have any more questions? All right, well, as others have observed, this, first opening days are always a little weird, and then you throw COVID restrictions in, and it was even weirder than usual, but it is really great for everybody to be back together, and it's great to be with all of you, even if virtually, but I know we will have plenty of chances to interact. Please stay in touch, and we want to be available. We are really committed in the Senate DFL caucus to making sure to the best of our ability, and we continue to work with the Senate Republicans and our nonpartisan staff to make sure that we can do this work both safely, effectively, and accountably. And we understand fully that accountably means transparently for stakeholders and media to have an opportunity to be engaged and participate and see what's going on. Bill Warner, I see you had another question.
Yeah, just one more, if you'll indulge me, Madam Leader. This election of Senator Tomassoni, does that set any sort of a tone that's maybe not where it should be at the start of a legislative session?
My response to that is less about tone and more about, it goes back to the kind of the accountability piece. We have a constitution and we have rules for reasons. And I know people's eyes glaze over when legislators start talking about process, but those processes exist for reasons of representing people and making sure that we are accountable. And I think, as I said on the floor, the critiques of the current situation are completely fair and justified, and we lived them a few years ago. But the solution to that is not to, do backbends and pretzel ourselves around the rules to come up with some sort of convenient patch. We ought to be dealing with this seriously, and I look forward to trying to continue having those conversations. We need a Senate president. We need a real Senate president, not some workaround.
Senator, I understand what you're saying, but if the shoe were on the other foot, wouldn't you try to protect your majority as well if you had majority control or the opportunity to get majority control of the Minnesota Senate, and perhaps, you know, do a bow and a curtsy to something like this?
I think there are ways that working together, we could come up with some solutions that would be satisfactory to everybody. But, you know, you know, we're not there today, but we'll see. We'll continue those conversations because we want to be obviously a functioning body in the Minnesota legislature. The Senate actually matters, and it matters that we're able to pass legislation and send it forward, and you can't do it without the president's signature.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for helping us kick off this this very interesting session. Look forward to working with everybody, and I'm glad you had a chance to get to meet these wonderful folks who will be joining us on a regular basis. Everybody take care. Thank you.